What is up, ladies and gentle nerds? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and today we are going to be looking at another random magic card. So let's go ahead and pull it on up. This is the first time I'm seeing this. This is fresh off the dome. All right. And the card we are going to be looking at is Tainted Isle. I love it when we pull lands with this because I always feel like I'm never going to have enough to talk about because at the end of the day, what is a land? It gives you access to mana so you can play the spells. But at the end of the day, the spells are the things you actually want to be playing. Those are the big splashy creatures. Those are the explosive events. They all come on the spells. However, the mana base is critical to your success. And without it, the rest of the deck can't work. So it is the equivalent of eating your vegetables. It is doing the exercises. It is the part that is foundational to your deck's health. If you want to cast those big, fun, splashy cards, you gotta have the mana base that can support it. And that gets especially interesting when you're looking at decks that have multiple colors. The moment you have 3, 4, 5 colors, and you have to fix all of that and make sure that you have access to those. And that is why lands get so freaking expensive. So the one that we're looking at today is called Tainted Isle. This was actually, the one that we're seeing here was from Plane Chase Anthology. And let's go ahead and, it was originally printed actually back in Torment, which is kind of fun. And so this is a pretty interesting little block. And I actually happen to have a couple versions of this from Torment, one of which is actually in one of my commander decks. And so what does it do? Tainted Isle, there's a whole series of tainted lands, by the way. There were 4 of them. And so the Tainted Isle, when it first comes into play, it comes into play untapped, by the way, which is possibly the single most important factor when you are looking at a land and asking yourself, is this good? Can you use it the very first turn you play it? If the answer to that is no, and can you use it in some capacity when you first put it onto the battlefield? That makes a huge difference. And so with Tainted Isle, if you have... So it comes into play untapped. It does add mana the very first turn you get it. You can tap it to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. All right, so that's not nothing. Back in Torment, that was basically like... That was almost useless or it wasn't useless. It gave you access to help with casting the generic mana costs on some of your spells. Actually, most of your spells, let's be honest. So, okay, it was good. But now, actually, it became better once the Eldrazi got introduced, because once the Eldrazi showed up, colorless is now a separate type of mana that is sometimes required in a way that it never was before. And so Tainted Isle can get you that, which is interesting. But Tainted Isle has a second ability as well, where you can add 1 blue or 1 black to your mana pool. But you can only play this ability if you control a swamp. So if you are in multiple colors and one of them happens to be blue and one of them happens to be black, as long as you are predominantly black, and your mana base is made up predominantly of swamps, then this is actually a really valuable way to fix your mana. If your mana base is not predominantly swamps, then it's probably not going to be a great way to fix mana necessarily. So I personally believe that the Tainted series, and so this is Tainted Isle, as you can imagine, it's the Tainted Island. It allows you to tap for black or blue. There's also the Tainted Forest. There's also it has a different name, like Tainted Thicket or something like that. And then there are, there's one for all the other colors as well. There's the Tainted Peaks, which is the mountain, and then Tainted Steppe, maybe, or anyway, there's a Plains version as well. And so there's one for each of these different color combinations with black. And if you're looking at a predominantly black deck that happens to splash into these other colors to do various things, then the Tainted series is fantastic for you because you're going to have swamps. You're going to have access to swamps. That's not a big deal at all. And so being able to get a little bit of mana fixing in some of those other areas, hey, that doesn't hurt at all. But I mentioned that I have this in one of my commander decks, and it is actually a Dimir deck. It's a Yuriko, the Tiger Shadow deck. And in that deck, it's only 2 colors. It's blue and it's black. And most of the creatures and most of the spells are actually a very low cost. So a lot of the time they don't have generic mana cost in them at all. And so I need access to both blue and black consistently to be able to cast whatever happens to be in my hand because they have colored pips on them. And so Tainted Isle is actually really, really useful because there is a chance that I start the game with Tainted Isle and Islands in my hand, which is rough. To be honest, I might mulligan that depending on what I see. However, if I start with a swamp and a Tainted Isle, then all of a sudden I have access to all my colors and life is great. And on top of that, I have access to all my colors and I can still play things that cost 2 black on turn 2. Or I could play a black and a blue. Or, I have a lot of options. And so the Tainted series is pretty great in those 2-color combination situations where one of them is black, if your split's pretty even. Yeah, so all in all, I think the Tainted series is actually pretty solid. They're a version of like the buddy lands that, meaning that if, or were they the check lands? I get those two confused. But the idea is if you already have something on the battlefield, you get, it works better, is the idea. So all in all, I think the Tainted series is excellent. Tainted Isle specifically, it's funny, of all the cards that we could have randomly dropped onto, this is the one that I actually use, just because I happen to have a place where it fits. So the other thing about this particular series that I find interesting is that this was back in Torment, which, if I'm not mistaken, was an asymmetrical set. I know there was a series around this time, and I think it was Torment, and that actually makes these lands make a lot more sense. And in that set, they actually had more black cards than anything else. And so the majority of the set was black, which was a design decision that they haven't gone back to, probably for good reason. I'm sure the limited environment was really unpleasant in that situation because basically everybody ends up having to draft black, because if you end up drafting red, there's a really good chance that you have to draft at least 2 colors, potentially 3, if one of them isn't black. Actually, you'd probably have to go 3 colors if you're not doing black in there somewhere. So I think black is unavoidable in the limited environment in that situation. In which case, the Tainted series is a great way to help fix your mana. So actually, in limited, these would in a Torment limited, these would be fantastic. But interestingly enough, I don't believe that I'm not aware of any other series that functions like this for any other color combinations. I think they all are black, which, given the fact that the word is tainted, that makes sense. But I can't help but wonder why not. Dual lands like this, as well as the pain lands like Yavimaya Coast and Shivan Reef, that come into play untapped, produce a colorless, and then you can also tap to add 1 mana of either of those 2 colors, and then you take 1 damage. I think those make a lot of sense. They're very clean, and they're awesome budget ways for folks playing in Legacy or playing in Commander to get access to dual lands that maybe aren't as flashy or aren't quite as efficient as Plan A, but can get you what you need on a budget. I feel like that's really useful, the right deck could be competitive with these in place of fetches and shocks. Is it going to be as consistent? Absolutely not. It just isn't. There's a reason that something like Tainted Isle is probably going for $2, $3, maybe $5 tops. Meanwhile, you take a Flooded Strand, which is, or Polluted Delta, which is the fetch land equivalent. It's $70, $80. There's one is definitely better than the other, and I mean reprint policies are also part of the deal there. But at the end of the day, this isn't your plan A if you're trying to be hyper competitive and try to win a lot. But if you have a fun casual deck and you want a couple budget options to just help the mana base operate a little better and run a little smoother, and that's the other thing. If you're taking the step from a casual player who has a handful of decks that they enjoy, or maybe even just 1 or 2 decks that you enjoy, but your mana base is made up almost exclusively of basic lands, that's okay. We've all been there. That is where we start. We start with monocolored decks with basic lands. That's okay. That's where everybody started. That's where I started. And I still actually have some fondness for that old mono green Stompy deck that I ran back in the day. But actually, I took the Croson Drovers and the Fierce Empaths that I had in that deck that were really what really made it sing, are actually in separate plastic. I've taken them aside, and I keep them separate because I have an affinity for those cards. But anyway, that's a tangent for another day. But when you're first starting out, it's not uncommon to start with 60 card decks running just basic lands. That's pretty standard because it's cheap. It's inexpensive and it's a great entry point to get an understanding of how the game operates. When you are taking that next step and trying to dial them in to get a little stronger and a little more consistent and a little more efficient, when you really take the next step with the mana bases, that's where you will find your consistency comes in. A deck with nothing but basics is still capable of incredibly big, incredibly flashy, incredibly fun plays. However, the number of incredibly big, incredibly fun, and incredibly flashy plays that you can pull off is going to be limited because the number of colors that you're going to have access to is going to be limited. Whereas the moment you have more consistent, stronger mana bases, you can get 2 or 3 colors available much more easily and much more consistently. And once you have that dialed in, you are going to see a higher win rate. You are going to see more consistent gameplay, and it's going to feel different. Like, you can tell when you are sitting down with a budget deck, it feels that. Like, you can tell that maybe things are a little bit slower, things aren't quite as dialed in, quite as efficient as they could be, but there is something, and I have to thank Arena specifically for giving me this experience, because this is something that's still pretty new to me. In a recent ladder, I decided to try something that I hadn't done before, and just full on net deck, which is something that I hate doing, to be honest. I enjoy the act of building a deck and really crafting it into something that I want, that I made from my own creativity and from my own thoughts. And I gotta say, when you're playing a deck in Arena on the ladder and it's working and it's not like anything else anyone's seen, there is something so incredibly satisfying about seeing that nice emote when you pop off on a combo that your opponent didn't see coming because no one else is doing it. That feels fantastic. And as a streamer, when I'm live on stream and I'm showing off a deck that I've never, that other people just aren't using, when I see names pop up in the chat that I've never seen before saying, dude, where did you get this list? And to be able to say, I came up with it, that feels so good. Am I going to get to Mythic rank doing that? No, I'm not. At least not with the power level where things are right now. Because once the meta gets solved, when people are playing the best things out there, they're mathematically the best. They're going to win the most games. And so, but to get back to my original point, recently I actually did, a couple months back, I net decked a Rakdos Sacrifice list, which had won a whole bunch of tournaments, and it was just like clearly one of the top 5 greatest decks available at the time. And I was like, you know what? This looked like the kind of strategy that I enjoy playing. It's aristocrat stuff. You're leveraging a lot of sacrifice, threat, and effects. You got, the Witch's Oven combo going. Like, all right, this looks like the kind of deck that I would like to play. And it just so happens to be viable right now. So, all right, let's give it a go. Like, let's take this list. Let's just drop it in and let's see what happens. And I actually hit some pretty consistent... It was incredibly consistent. The games played similarly over and over, but on top of that, there was my brain clicked into like a 4th gear when I was running with that deck, because every single point of damage mattered. It became a question every turn of, how do I get the maximum value out of these 2 lands or these 3 lands? And all of a sudden I had to approach the game completely differently to try to get maximum value. And I felt like it feels like when you're running a very tight, very competitive deck and you need to make sure that you hit every single play correctly, it is a much more engaging, much more challenging experience as a player than when you're playing kind of more casual, more fun Magic. Now, there's a place for both. They're both fantastic. Like, I love them both dearly. But the idea of really buckling down and kind of riding on a razor's edge through a game to find the right way to just squeak in lethal, it's exhilarating. And I see why people enjoy that level of play. So to all the spikes out there, I get it, man. I get it. It's fun. That's really fun to win a lot of games. And to have that kind of experience where it's less about what cards you draw and more about how you play the cards you have. And that's exciting. And dialing in your mana bases and playing with some of the best cards available that have been mathematically proven to be the most challenging, or the strongest cards and the most efficient cards, that's where you get that experience, and that's how you do that. And if it wasn't for Arena, there's no way I would ever do that, because the moment cards become part of those decks, their price tag skyrockets, because all of a sudden people need them in order to compete for cash prizes. And there are some people out there who play Magic the Gathering professionally, like to make a living, like they're paying their rent that way. And yeah, buying the cards they need for the deck that they're going to take to their next tournament, buying those cards is a business expense at that point. So they're going to do it. And that costs money, and that drives the price up for the rest of us. So if you don't have aspirations of competing at that level, buying the $100 fetch land doesn't make sense. It just doesn't, because that product is not for you at that point, which sucks. Like, I disagree with that philosophy, and I wish those cards were available to casual players, but by the virtue of the way the market works right now, they just aren't. Enter cards like Tainted Isle or Shivan Reef, or these dual lands that come into play untapped, that give you access to multiple colors and can fit into unique circumstances, that have a slight drawback compared to their more expensive counterparts, but it costs, in some cases, 1/100th. Like, it costs 1% of the more expensive version, because when you are trying to get every single cent of value that you can out of every single card, the drawback on Tainted Isle as compared to Polluted Delta is astronomical. For the casual player who's sitting down with their buddies and wants to play a Commander game, that difference is not that big. It's just not. It's not worth the $90 or whatever it is. So I would highly recommend Tainted Isle. They're an uncommon from Torment that's been reprinted a handful of times in some other casual formats. If you play black with splashes, like if you play in Grixis, if you play in Jund, I would definitely recommend, well, okay, not Jund for the Tainted Isle, but like Tainted Peaks and the Tainted Forest. Like, if you're playing in those kinds of 3-color combinations where black is really the center, but you want to have some extra stuff going on, the Tainted series is great. Highly recommended. So yeah, this has been an interesting one, and like always, I end up going 8 minutes longer than I expect to, because lands get me going, apparently, because the truth is, lands are the foundation of the game. They're the fundamental resource that everything else revolves around. So without a good mana base, you cannot have a good deck, period. That's just how it goes. And I find it interesting how Wizards has addressed that over the years, how they've different ways that they've found to be creative with mana bases. I get a kick out of it. And also, I'm actually saying all of this at the same time that I'm running a deck on Arena right now that is the first deck that I have ever run that has absolutely no mana fixing of any kind, because it's completely colorless. More on that later, because it's actually proving to be pretty darn good. So keep an eye out for the channel. Keep an eye out on the channel. We'll be doing a deck tech on that before too long, because it's a lot of fun. And anyway, so mana fixing is incredibly important, no matter how you do it. And actually, even then, my mana base in a colorless deck is still very deliberate, believe it or not. And again, more to come on that later. But your mana makes the world go round. If you don't have mana, you can't play. Anyway, so this has been Tainted Isle. Fun stuff. Thanks so much for hanging out, everybody. I do stream over on Twitch, twitch.tv/hamhawks42. I'm also on Twitter @hawks42. Go ahead and give me a follow over there. And if you are listening to this on a podcast in your podcatching app of choice, it's an awkward way of saying that, but you know what I mean. If you're listening to this, if I'm chilling in your headphones right now, thank you. I appreciate you. But yeah, it's also available on YouTube, so you can actually see what I look like, and you can see the card art for the card that we're discussing. If you're watching this on YouTube, hi. And this is also available as a podcast. So if you would rather listen to the audio version in your car or while you're working out, that is available as well. and it's available anywhere you get your podcast. Special thanks to the Anchor app, anchor.fm. More on that at the beginning of the podcast if you're watching this on YouTube. Anyway, thank you so much for hanging out. You guys are the best. Have a great day. Be good to yourselves, and I will catch you next time.